Okay, we're ready whenever you're ready.
All right. Let's start the Design Review Board meeting. Could we have a roll call, please, Maria?
Yes, Miss Anthony
Here.
and Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, let's welcome Miss Paige Anthony. She's our brand new DRB member.
Wonderful. Welcome, Paige.
Thank you.
Welcome
I'm
aboard.
glad to be here.
Miss Bright,
Present. And welcome, Paige.
Miss Dickinson. She's not here yet. Miss Clement let me know she wasn't going to be able to make it today. Mr. Kapler
Here.
and Mr. Stevie. Not here yet. We do have quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay. The
Hey,
first
Maria.
business,
Oh,
the first order of.
I'm sorry,
Oh, go
who's
ahead.
Paul?
Hey, this is Grace.
Grace is here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, Grace.
Hey.
All right.
welcome,
We have
Paige.
four DRB members this morning, and we have a quorum. And so let's launch into number 2, which is the review and approval of the July 8th meeting minutes. We would want to have a motion and a vote to approve these minutes.
I would, but I was absent.
All
I'll
right.
make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Grace. I'll second that motion. It's a good motion to second. And I'll call for a vote. All in favor of approving the last meeting minutes? And Rosemary, you can vote, even though you weren't there. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Say nay. The motion passes. Thank you. All right, now we are on to number 3, which is our call to the audience. We would ask anybody who's not a direct applicant, a staff member, or a DRB member to, now's your time if you wanted to say something to the commission here. So this is the call to the audience. Do we have anyone in the audience that would like to take 30 seconds or so to say something?
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, I did send you a few days ago 3 letters that we received from neighbors, and I just want to make sure that you receive them. And those who send those letters, I believe at least a couple of them are present.
Don't know where the meeting is. Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to say I'm here. I signed in late. I don't know if you noticed, Maria. It's Susanna.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, Susanna. I've taken note. Okay, I think we're ready to move forward, Mr. Chair. Did we lose our chair?
Oh, I'm on mute. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
Let's
That's okay.
let's go to our first case. First by
Oh,
a
Mr.
review by
Chair,
the staff, and then-
we were in the call of the audience, and we have
Oh,
Mr. Steve Dolan ready to speak.
Oh, well then let's have Steve speak, please.
Mr.
His
Dolan,
microphone is on
you're
mute.
muted.
I've been there myself.
That's what happens in virtual meetings. Good morning. I'd request at least 3 minutes and a normal call to the audience. Good morning, board members, including Paige. I'm Steve Dolan, a 48-year Tucson resident who provided the Tucson Mountains Association letter and maps. Some are 11 by 17 maps from Pima County Flood Control. I wanted to provide to you physically to see this dangerous location. As I said, in my opinion, virtual meetings are not the best communication, and electronic maps are too small. The Cottonwood site is probably the worst location along these 12 miles of the Santa Cruz River due to the flooding and erosion history. and there is no existing soil cement bank protection at this site. The mayor and council do not have all the expertise, so they rely on boards and commissions such as DRB for professional research and technical recommendations. The DRB general purview should consider the maps and critical facility information for this special exception request. Separate from the TMA letter maps showing the historical danger, this site is not in compliance with UDC section 4.911A numbers 8 and 9. For the DRB's specific purview, the TE project is not in accordance with UDC section 4.911A use-specific standards for a utilities distribution system that is also a critical facility per FEMA standards. A substation facility is not keeping with the character of the R1 and R2 residential zone in which it is located and the adjacent Paseo de las Iglesias habitat restoration area. 2, new electrical mechanical equipment should not be located next to the Santa Cruz River, the major regional watercourse in southern Arizona. This is a critical facility that should never be located within or near an erosion hazard or FEMA mapped floodplain and floodway. Note, there was faulty engineering analysis of a straight reach of the Santa Cruz River used for the variance request to mayor and council. The site is within the erosion hazard setback of 1,230 feet for a curved section of the river, obvious on the topo maps provided to the DRB. 3, most important are the other contributing features of flooding and erosion to the site, downplayed or not mentioned in the special exception request documents. Also, the flood-related information should not be major wash. It should be regional watercourse with FEMA floodplain. This is a safety issue along the Santa Cruz River, not a design issue for a critical facility in the wrong location. Using maps for a general purview of the historically dangerous site and the specific purview of not meeting the UDC, the DRB can justify finding the project not in compliance for a special exception. Thank you on this cool morning. Thank you.
And we have a second neighbor on the phone, Mr. Chair.
All right, let's go to the caller.
Is that me?
That is you.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
If you can please state your name and your address.
Okay. Beryl Baker, 2723 South Mission. I'm one of the facilitators for the Santa Cruz Southwest neighborhood. And this is about the TEP substation along the bank of the Santa Cruz River north of Ajo on Cottonwood Lane. We have lived in this area for 50 years. When we helped form the neighborhood association in 1987, our neighborhood's intentions were to save a place with a rich historical background, including in that was saving the open space of the west branch of the Santa Cruz River, which flowed through the neighborhood. Through our efforts and good fortune, we were able to encourage Pima County to buy a large portion of the open space concerned with the west branch of the Santa Cruz River. Over the years, the county has been able to expand their holdings of open space in the neighborhood. Our neighborhood also participated in the design of the Santa Cruz River project between Ajo and 29th Street. The intention of both our neighborhood and Pima County was to maintain and create a more natural Santa Cruz River habitat through that area, instead of the kind of bank protection seen north of 29th on the Santa Cruz River. Originally, the county had in mind to add a loop trail from the Santa Cruz River to the West Branch. However, over the years, that has become less feasible as well as less desirable in order to maintain the integrity of the West Branch of the Santa Cruz. TEP is suggesting a possible multiple-use trail somehow through their property. However, from the design they have offered, this appears to be a red herring to try to appease the neighborhood. It is our opinion that the neighborhood would not welcome a multi-use path through the neighborhood for various reasons, including numbers of strangers moving through the area. and the need for infrastructure intruding on the West Branch and its inhabitants. This TEP substation does not fit into the goals of both the neighborhood and the county for natural wildlife habitat along the Santa Cruz River for people to enjoy now and in the future. Please help deny this requested variance and or construction of this utility at this location. Thank you for listening and have a good morning.
Thank you. Thank you for the comment.
I don't think we have anybody else from the neighborhood, Mr. Chair.
Okay, great. I noticed that those comments pertain to the second case of the morning. Shall we start with the first one? Let me pull that up on my screen. All right. I'd like to go to agenda item number 4, which is case RNA DRB 2207, conversion of a single family residence to an office. And first, maybe the staff can present the case, and then we'll let the applicant present the details.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this project has been seen in the past by the DRB back in June. And at that point, the DRB requested the applicant to return to the DRB with a revised application that demonstrates compliance with the section of the code 494R7A through E, which is the DRB's purview. And just as a reminder, at the DRB meeting in June, one of the main issues that were raised by the DRB was the size of the parking area. The DRB thought at that point that back then the applicant was proposing 18 parking spaces, the size of the parking area not, being in tune with the surrounding properties in the neighborhood, becoming a dominating feature on the site. We triple check with entitlement staff, and now with this revised application that you'll see in a moment, entitlements has confirmed that these will not trigger a modification of the rezoning conditions, and they were okay with the new proposed parking area. Another item that DRB brought up at that time was the location screening of mechanical equipment. Now the applicant has included some details about how's that going to be handled. The DRB also suggested to the architect to secure, to the applicant to secure a landscape architect. I checked with zoning staff, and for this type of project, a registered landscape architect is not required per code. However, I believe the applicant will present some changes on the landscape plan. The other item was the vehicular circulation and pedestrian circulation to and from Craycroft Road and within the site. So the DRB was trying to find ways for not having to have a couple of driveways, but after checking with zoning review staff, it's not possible just because of the way the existing house is placed, and in order to meet code for pedestrian and vehicular access, the two driveways will need to be maintained. That's all I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is the applicant here, and would they like to speak to their application?
Rene, you're muted.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, good morning, members of the board, staff, and public in general. My name is Rene Martinez. I'm the applicant and the licensed civil engineer on this project. And yeah, pretty much what Maria mentioned, it went through a rezoning. It was approved, and So a requirement to the, I mean, a submittal to the DRB was required, and here we are. Recent changes have seen reduced in the parking. That was one of the main issues. And every little item that was addressed in the previous meeting has been revised. Also, there was an issue about the wall. There's an existing wall. There's an existing easement, utility easement on the north side of the property. Initially, we wanted to screen that, but again, it was decided in the last. It's just the north side where the number 12 is there. Keynote number 12. So we're not going to put a new wall anymore. It would have created some dangerous conditions, tunneling and other undesirable conditions due to safety and so on. But I don't see any other major issues with this. Hopefully it goes through, and I'll be here for any questions you might need.
Thank you. I'm not 100% clear on what, if any, changes have been made since the last application. Could you? Is it still 18 parking spots, or is it less? It looks like it's less.
No, it's much less. It's just
Much
6
less.
parking. Yes.
6.
And the rest of the area will be landscaped. I don't know if you can show the landscape plan, the next sheet. But yes, it's pretty much.
Is the overall square footage of the drive and parking lot reduced? It appears to be.
Yes, considerably.
Yeah.
Yes, and right now it's being reviewed by Development Services. So we'll see.
Okay. And then the other observation that I have, and you guys both hit on it, we could not reduce one of the driveways, so it's sort of a circulation around the old house, and that remains. Okay. I wonder if the DRB has any comments that they'd like to make or clarifications that they would like to request.
I have one.
Oh,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Stevie, I'm gonna take note. Did you just join in?
No, I joined like right was you guys were doing meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you.
I heard him vote for the meeting minutes, and I wondered who was voting. Hey, Chris.
7, yeah, it was like 7:33, something like that.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question. In Maria and staff's review or overview of process that's happened so far, there's nothing in the zoning, rezoning, and layout of the site that would allow the second driveway configuration to be in relief. I'd like to ask the applicant if they've used all means possible within the, I guess, city processes to find relief from that, specifically asking if there's another variance request beyond the DRB that would be able to relieve that.
Okay. No, first of all, there was not another variance requested because if we don't have another driveway on either north or south, it's too narrow for a two-way or a two-way driveway. It's
I understand that condition, but that's what variances are for, is to allow conditions that don't meet 100% of code that provide some relief. Your neighbors directly adjacent to this property have that condition on their property. Just from looking at it visually, those driveways appear not to be 20 or 28 feet, whatever is needed for two-way traffic.
Yeah, I agree. If it was which the one to the south, is close to 20 feet. What we have right now on the south driveway on our property is 10 feet. So it barely fits. Actually, that driveway was, they did an additional permit, so we had that removed and demolished. First of all, so on the north side, there's an easement. We won't be able to put a curb on that easement, and it's less than 15 feet in width. So
I guess
I mean,
I'm not asking the technical. I'm not necessarily asking the technical conditions of that. I'm asking if every avenue has been explored to relieve the condition of having to have two driveways on this site. My opinion on that is the two driveways I'm not the concerned with. It's the amount of paving on the west side of this building between the front of the building and the street does not, in my opinion, contribute to the neighborhood character, and it actually detracts from the neighborhood character.
While everyone's thinking about that, is the driveway proposed asphalt or concrete or something else?
it's asphalt.
Asphalt. Chris, would it feel better from your perspective if it was a some sort of crushed stone or rock mulch driveway that wasn't presenting as asphalt?
Potentially, yes. And or I mean, it isn't like that. There's I don't. Truthfully, I'd almost like it better if those driveways just went straight out and there was land that they didn't come back together around into the front to a single egress. Like if you had a driveway, a residential driveway that had a loop around, that had two driveway entrances. It just feels there's curb on all of it. It's a hard surface. I mean, I know it's a commercial property and there's other things that need to be maintained, but it feels very, very built and hard, and not a lot of ability to kind of soften that up and have it fit the remainder of that neighborhood or neighbors nearby or adjacent. That's just my opinion on that.
Well, I do notice the neighbor to the south was not using asphalt. It appeared from the photographs that it was concrete, and if you blacktop that whole thing, it will not read as residential. Making it concrete is a step in the right direction, or possibly making it a rock mulch drive would soften it up, because that way it's not just like welcome to my asphalt, it's welcome to the office in my neighborhood. Feel a lot better. Yeah, that's a decorative concrete drive that they have there, and it looks plenty wide enough for two cars to safely pass, and it's not a blind turn. It is a tough condition in the subject property. You don't want you don't want two cars to meet there, and there's a power pole there. It's tight. It is. But I think if you put a nice, if it was rock mulch or decomposed granite compacted tightly, you could drive on that, and it would be a lot softer. I know you still have to have curbs because that's what is required. Residential places do not have curbs, but you could still possibly do a portion of it in something other than asphalt.
Absolutely, yeah, and good point taken. Yeah, we are totally glad to, at least the front part of it. And if development services is okay with it, we can do everything as a gravel and mulch, so that way, it still is it's a dust control surface, and and it will fit better with the curb appeal of the neighborhood. And just a quick point, the two driveway entrances option was explored, but it was, as one of the members was saying, it creates a dangerous situation between the adjacent driveways. There's a minimum distance you need to be away from an existing driveway to have another entrance to our properties. So, and it makes sense. Right now, it's just right next to it, but officially and per code, it won't be recommended to be as two-way. I mean, two driveways, one on each side, and very close to the adjacent driveway.
I see that DRB Susanna would like to say something. Go ahead, Susanna.
Yeah, I don't know about the required distance from another driveway, but if I look at the geometry in plan of your driveway, it just seems, I mean, generally, you know, filleted corners and turning radii are all pretty determined pieces, but it just seems really strange, the design, that it's just different widths all over the place, so it doesn't feel like the minimum amount of paving, whatever it is made out of, is really existing, because there's so many anomalies in just the shape of this thing.
I think that I would say that the applicant is dealing with a lot of constraints, and it is trying to fit the minimums within the constraints.
I understand that. I'm just saying it doesn't seem very rigorous in terms of the geometry, because some corners are not filleted. You know, there's so many different widths everywhere, even within the constraints you're dealing with. And just even where it opens onto Craycroft, that's a bigger width, you know, at the fillet, the edge of a drive, than I believe is needed. I mean, it just doesn't. You understand what I'm saying? Like,
I hear what you're saying, and I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to double check all these dimensions against requirements. I can't do that. Like the 24 feet opening, you're saying that is too big?
No, I'm just saying the curve goes really wide. It goes wider. You know, if you look at the curve, it goes to about 30 feet where it hits the road, or more than that. And at the top, you know, there's the 10-foot width, and then there isn't even a fillet of the curb or the driveway. So it just makes me a little concerned that it isn't completely kind of rigorous, I guess, and based on turning radii.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, all the specifics of the design of access and curves and side visibility triangles and turning radii, that will be reviewed through the development package review process. That would be part of the responsibilities from not only zoning and engineering, but also fire, because they will need to have the appropriate access for their purposes. So that's part of the review of the development package.
I guess my question is, Maria, there may be enough access, but do they look at, could it be smaller to minimize the amount of paving when they review that? They may just be looking at whether they can get in, but they may not look at, is this the minimum amount I can have to actually do my job? That's my concern.
Yeah, let me speak. Yeah, pretty much it's at its minimum width. It goes into a 24. The minimum width is 10 on the sides. I mean, it opens up. The only place I see that might be reduced, it's not going to be impacted that much, is coming through the south driveway, and you go straight next, adjacent to the building. Once you get into the parking lot, that 18-foot floor that we have, that might be reduced 3 feet. But that's the only gain we will have there. I mean, we can modify that. There's no issues. Or smooth a little bit of I mean, sharpen the curve, that 9'3" curve on the south driveway coming into the parking. On the north, we can't really do much. We have the parking spaces there. We need a minimum of between 10 and 14 feet, actually between 13 and 15 feet coming into the driveway. There's a 14.3 measurement there, and that's honestly pretty much the minimum per code, and to make it functional, basically.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, the width of those two driveways on the north and the south side will need to go through a special, review process. Because as you may know, the minimum width of a two-way, it's 24 feet. For a one-way, it's 12 feet. So the applicant will still need to go through a special review process for reducing from 12 to 10 feet. Just by looking at the comments that he has received so far, seems like the fire department would be okay with that, but I see it very difficult trying to fit a two-way traffic flow, including accommodating for fire trucks with just a 10-foot driveway.
Well, it also seems if you're allowing 10 foot, that you should allow 20 foot for the two-way, because it doesn't make sense.
I'm not the authority on that, Ms. Dickinson. That's up to the code reviewers to decide, and the PDSD director.
Yeah, we try that, honestly. We try 20 feet on the back and 20 feet on the entrance. And no, they said the minimum will be that to comply with the UDC codes.
Any other observations or comments from the DRB? Marie has put on the screen our purview. We're supposed to review this submission against UDC section 494R7. And maybe we shall, maybe we should look at the specific items that we're to evaluate. I'll read the first one. The building materials on the exterior facade are compatible within the neighborhood block. And the exterior facade, meaning the elevation, but I think it also includes the landscaping and everything that you see from the street there, which would include the, potentially black asphalt, which I don't think you should do black asphalt. We didn't have any issues with the facade last time, these elevations, if I recall. Any comments on point A? Think about it. We'll go on to point B. Color schemes of the new building are compatible. B, the exterior facade of new construction is of residential type. There is no new construction for the facade. Building scale of new construction complements rather than is dominant to scale to adjacent projects. I think what we're struggling with is a dominant driveway. Last time we said that the driveway and parking lot were too dominant. And the new revision that we're looking at now has a lot more landscaping in the back. And in an attempt to reduce the geometry of driveway and the parking has been reduced. But we're still left with a dominant driveway asphalt entrance. Let's go to the next bullet point if we could, Maria. Having to do with mechanical equipment. Where is the mechanical equipment on this site plan?
Okay. If you can put the elevations, please. Right there in the front, on the upper left side, we have the left side is the existing condition. You can see on the front or west elevation, there's another mechanical unit wall mounted on the right-hand side of that building. So that's going to be removed. It's noted there to be placed on the rear side of the building.
Okay, so it'll be screened.
And it's now showing the rear east elevation on the right-hand side drawings of the proposed, right next to the door, the rear door there. There you go. That one.
Okay. So it appears to be that the mechanical equipment is screened from the front. It's below the ridge. That's important. A lot of times it's above the ridge, but it's got to be below the ridge. Okay. Questions on our purview DRB?
This is Rosemary. I just want to say, I appreciate the work that the applicant has done since our last review. It seems to me that it's much more in compliance, and my big concern, like Chris mentioned, is just the asphalt. And I think if there's a way to soften the appearance of that with a different material in the driveway, at least at the front of the property, that would go a long way.
I agree, and yeah, we can revise that. No problem at all. I don't know if that can be stated on a recommendation from the DRB, so staff at the development services can take that into account.
Well, DRB, we have a limited purview here. We've got a revision in front of us, and the point of contention in my mind is only the scale of new construction, which would be dominant to adjacent projects, would be the size of the driveway. Everything else, I think, is in compliance without much of a discussion needed. So here we are. The building scale of new construction complements rather than is dominant in scale to adjacent projects. Rosemary made an interesting point that if we can soften up that dominant driveway, it would be more complementary to the neighborhood. How do we feel about that, DRB? Can we make a motion that would include a request to soften the asphalt with a different building material?
I think we should include Susanna's point about minimizing the paving as well.
Minimizing what was that, Grace?
Minimizing the amount of paving. Are we really hitting those minimums? And then also softening with a different material.
Yeah, it seems like the minimum is 12 feet for a driveway and they're at 10 feet. So then my response to that would be they've minimized it as much as they can.
Well, I don't think they haven't geometrically, so it would be nice to just have a point in there to just say in the next review, just to review that it is the minimums on the entire project. not just on that 10-foot piece.
So maybe a subject to condition that they confirm
Yes,
the area of the driveway and parking lots are at or below the code minimums.
yeah.
Would that be an
Hey, Nate,
approval with a condition or a denial and like a revise and resubmit type of situation? I'm a contractor. I like approve as noted, but maybe some of the architects like revise and resubmit better.
Well, if you ask me,
Well, unfortunately, I'm asking the design review board. My team here has to make the recommendation and the motion. We know the applicant would like to just move on with this, but we want to make sure that we're doing our duty to the city and reviewing it against our purview.
and I agree.
This is Chris.
Yes, Chris, go ahead.
I don't want to leave this point that Rosemary's making. I think Rosemary, if I was hearing what you were saying, I think with the geometry comment that you're making, it appears as though when you get to the actual curb interface at Craycroft, the radiuses of that turning motion of the curb feel out of proportion or don't feel like they're traditionally what I would view or see on a plan from a civil engineer. That I think that throwing that down, keeping the minimums and the curb radius minimums of that turning motion and having that be a clean driveway apron from the Craycroft curb up to where it turns into a two-way driveway. Is that the point you're making, Rosemary? Is that feels off to me, and I'm seeing the same thing you are. Those don't feel like typical geometries that I would see. And
That was
those
actually
could, if those were
Susanna.
tightened up.
Yeah, that was
Susanna, sorry.
Susanna. I'll let her comment.
Yeah, that was me commenting. Yes, the geometry is a little bit off in quite a few points just for turning radii. I can see
Right.
that
So
having looked at multiple plans over the years. That's why I
right.
brought it up.
Like we're all there's several of us on this board that review and look at, you know, horizontal controls and layouts quite frequently, and it just feels like this isn't per typicals. And if you look at those geometries, especially around the access ramps that run north and south along the pedestrian way there, it feels like it opens bigger, so it gives this appearance that it's a larger opening in the street, which maybe need to be there for safety or for egress. But I'd like to see that part of our recommendations, that those turning radiuses, and that, because I think that those need to be either revisited or reviewed through DOT recommendations to make sure that they're hitting the correct dimensions. Because I think if that happens, the impression of that front initial face of this property could be softened up a little bit, or at least given a cleaner appearance. And with that, I'd like to also add on that there's quite a bit of landscape space in here between sidewalk and the main property line. You have an interior border identified, but that interior border is only partially planted. Part of the statement that I was making earlier in this is that the residential character or residential view, or that the softening of this large paving area where the two driveways come together, I think could be mitigated through additional landscaping from the face of the building to the street, including the landscape area directly in front, the foundation and landscape area in front of the building. I don't see any landscaping depicted in the actual building area. Within the interior area.
I would agree with Chris. This is Paige. that there's noted that there's landscape area in front of the building, but no landscaping shown.
So I think, Nate, as far as any recommendations I'd like to add as comments or added statements onto any determination that we're probably heading towards a vote on, the additional landscaping on the west side from the face of the building to the street is definitely going to be something I'd like to have added.
Thank you, Chris.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, just as a reminder, the DRB can hold up to 2 meetings on a project. Cannot ask the applicant to continue to come back unless the applicant requests from the DRB a 3rd or 4th or 5th review. So at this point, staff would appreciate very concrete conditions. So when we proceed with the review of the development package, we make sure that those conditions are being met by the applicant.
So it seems, based on this 2-meeting limit, that if the DRB wants to have a recommendation in front of the director, we need to make that recommendation with some concrete conditions, or conditions. Who's ready to take a stab at that?
Before we jump in, I just want to kind of recap. So it sounds like we have 3 conditions that we're requesting. 1 pertains to the material of the driveway, 1 pertains to the amount and location of landscaping, and then the 3rd is just to confirm turning radii and minimum drive aisle widths within the property. Does that sound like what we talked about?
That sounds perfect to me.
It sounds like you're about to make a motion, Rosemary.
I sure can. So let's clarify what are the materials that we want to recommend for the front drive. We talked about compressed DG. Concrete is also a possibility, perhaps pavers. Are there others that we want to note?
I think within our language, I don't want to give a recommendation of one. I just want to make a recommendation that they explore alternative materials, including, that type of wording. That
Okay.
I don't want to push the applicant into any specific surfacing type. Just that we have an opposition to the amount of asphalt being shown.
Sounds good.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, if you can also be specific about, the areas within the site where you would be recommending those alternative materials for pavement. Are we talking about the entire site or what portions?
To me, it's the front portion that matters the most.
Agreed.
And it's like, this is probably too simplistic, but what we're hearing is we want to maximize the landscaping and minimize the driveway.
Well,
Minimize it.
and ideally, it would be a pervious material, but I
love that too.
We could, but I don't think we can force, kind of what Chris was saying, force that on someone, but ideally it would be over the whole area, but with particular attention on the kind of west kind of street front.
Nate, to clarify our thing, let everyone let me know if you agree with this. I think the three points that were brought up as conditions. These are all pertaining to facade, west facade of the building to the street curb of Craycroft. Primarily, I don't think we have any real issues with back of building or the very sides of structure. Those are all kind of out of view, and I think that they're doing the best they can back there. But
Well,
my main thing is the front of the building to the street.
well, my main thing is, you know, it's all destruction of the environment, whether you see it or not. So ideally, you know, whether it's hidden in the back, which was our main point before, that just conceptually we should try and minimize these kind of materials on the natural environment.
I can agree with that.
Yep. Okay, so we could probably recommend impervious material that blends in with the it could translate almost like a landscaping surface rather than a traffic surface. All right, Rosemary, I think you're up.
Okay, so I think my understanding is that we're approving, but we're making these recommendations, correct?
Mine as well.
Yes. Okay,
Yes.
so the design review board has reviewed the applicant's project for the proposed rezoning to O1 and recommends to the Planning and Development Services Director approval, finding the project in compliance subject to the following recommendations. One, we would like the applicant to consider alternate paving materials other than asphalt that complement the residential nature of the neighborhood. Possibilities include compressed DG, concrete. We encourage the applicant to consider pervious paving throughout the site. And our recommendation for aesthetics pertains namely to the portions of the property visible from the street on the west side. We also encourage the applicant to increase the amount of landscaping on the west side of the property between the building and the street. And thirdly, we would like to know that the applicant has minimized drive aisles and confirmed correct turning radii throughout the site in terms of the parking area and drive aisles.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosemary. Is there a second to this motion?
I will.
It's been seconded. All right, thank you. I'll call for a vote. All in favor of this motion, say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
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 Any opposed, say nay. The ayes have it and the motion has passed. Thank you, DRB. Thank you, applicant. Let's move to agenda item number 5, which is case DRB 2211, having to do with the new Tep Cottonwood Substation. First, we'll get a overview from staff, and then we will let the applicant present. And if there's a 2-meeting rule, I'm making special note that we've already seen this once. Is that correct, Maria?
No, this is a brand new case, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well then I'm just having a case of deja vu.
Yeah, the DRB reviewed a couple of TEP substations, one by the U of A and the other one, if I recall correctly, is by Golf Links.
Okay, all right.
And before we proceed, Mr. Chair, if I can ask Ms. Shaw what time she arrived at the meeting.
I was here at the beginning.
At the beginning? Oh, I'm so sorry. I failed to call your name at roll call.
But no, we checked her in that roll call because I remember saying good morning to Grace.
Okay, great. Then I'm getting confused. My apologies.
All right.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, we have Carver Strew from Entitlements. Carver, you want to introduce the project, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Maria. Yes, this is a Tucson Electric Power proposed substation that is being requested for approval as a special exception land use in the R1 and R2 residence zone within the city of Tucson. The proposed land use is going to be a 138 slash 13.8 kilovolt distribution station and transmission distribution power lines to support greater distribution of power and redundancy within the western area of the city of Tucson. It's intended to help drive economic development as well within the surrounding area.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, this property has split zoning R1 and R2, and is subject to review by the DRB. And here's the purview on the screen. And I'm gonna read it just to remind everybody. In accordance with UDC section 4911A8, use specific standards, utilities use group distribution system. Any building housing such facility shall be in keeping with the character of the zone in which it is located. The Design Review Board shall review all applications and make recommendations to the zoning examiner. The DRB shall review architectural style, building elevations, materials on exterior facades, color schemes, new mechanical equipment locations, light of outdoor areas, window locations and types, screening, landscaping, vehicular use areas, and other contributing design features. And that's all we have, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks for reading our purview. So we'll keep that in mind. And we would like to hear from the applicant if they could present their application to the board for our review.
Thank you, Chair Kapler and members of the board. I'm going to share my screen now. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, we see it.
Thank you. So this is the Design Review Board presentation for the Cottonwood 138 kilovolt substation as part of the Special Exception Land Use Permit process. My name is Chris Ortiz-Pino. I am an environmental land use planner for TEP. Joining me on this call is Engineering Project Manager Amanda Wittenborn, Civil and Transmission Engineer Miranda Jackson, our Civil Engineer Consultant Kevin Latondra, and our Landscape Architect Scott Martinez. Quick agenda for the presentation. I'll be going over substation information and background for context. We will continue to the project design elements such as the decorative perimeter wall, landscape buffers, and our multi-use path connection. This will be followed by a Q&A about the CELUP application and substation. The Cottonwood Substation property is located on the east side of Cottonwood Lane, approximately 1/4 mile north of West Ajo Way. The site is immediately west of the Paseo de las Iglesias River Park and along the west bank of the Santa Cruz River. As you can see just north of Ajo Way and south of the proposed substation parcel, a temporary mobile substation is in place. This mobile substation has been in service since approximately 2019 as a stopgap measure to provide continued and reliable service to the area. This temporary mobile substation is permitted until the Cottonwood substation can be put into service and will then be decommissioned. TP is requesting approval for an electric substation as a special exception land use in the residence zones R1 and R2 within the city of Tucson. There is adjacent mobile home zoning to the west, R1 to the north, and R2 to the east. TP proposes building a new 138 kilovolt substation on a 10.7 acre site. The substation will connect to an existing transmission line that is adjacent to the property. The substation will convert energy from transmission level voltages to distribution levels for the safe delivery of electric service to area customers. Purpose and need of the substation is to strengthen electric reliability for customers, meet future energy needs, and expand power capacity to help drive economic development in the surrounding area. The area west of I-19 from Star Pass Boulevard to Irvington Road has seen substantial load growth as a result of new commercial and residential developments. Currently, this area is served by 5 distribution circuits from 3 separate substations. An analysis of this existing infrastructure has determined that each of the distribution circuits are significantly loaded and by the existing demand. In order to provide contingency support and allow for greater flexibility in response to outages, construction of a new substation is necessary. As I stated in the previous slide, benefits of the new substation include increased reliability for customers, the ability to meet future energy needs that are being driven by economic development in the area. A new substation will also reduce the amount of time it takes to restore service after a power outage. The new substation will be built on an existing brownfield site that was previously used for aggregate mining and inert material screening. Due to limited future development opportunities for this site, a substation provides the best and highest use of the land while contributing to the enhancement of the adjacent Paseo de las Iglesias River Park. Additionally, the new substation will support TEP's continual efforts to improve reliability by retiring aging 46 kilovolt substations. On the screen now, you can see our preliminary development plan. I'd like to call your attention to, there'll be 2 access roads into the substation, with the primary access being on the west side of the substation. That gate will have a mechanical security gate that is going to be opened by a card reader. The second access on the south will be in case of emergency if the primary access is blocked. The substation will be enclosed by a 12-foot decorative wall consisting of split-face cinder masonry blocks. We are proposing a 2-tone banded wall of desert brown and a 4-course band of gray. The perimeter wall height is required to meet federal critical infrastructure protection standards and will be addressed by the zoning examiner in the special exception land use permitting process. Additionally, there is a 20-foot perimeter security access road along the outside of the security wall. Sorry. Man, I just skipped there. Jeez. There will also be a riprap line drainage channel, which will receive flows from the Desert Pueblo Mobile Home Park to the west, conveying water around the substation to the north and into the river, Santa Cruz River, at the northeast corner of the parcel. I'd like to call your attention to the detail in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, where we propose a new 12-foot wide multi-use path, which will be constructed in Cottonwood Lane Road right-of-way, and will connect the Paseo de las Iglesias River Park with a planned future multi-use path along the west branch of the Santa Cruz Wash. Landscape plans include new drought-tolerant trees and shrubs along Cottonwood Lane and within landscape buffer yards, as well as water harvesting basins and the areas south of the substation. There will be lighting inside the substation only for emergency purposes and maintenance, and this will happen only if it occurs at night. There will be no dusk to dawn lighting within the project or the project site. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our landscape architect, who will discuss the landscape plan.
Thank you, Christopher. You took all the glory out of the other site plan. This is my construction sort of co-compliance landscape document. But first off, good morning, staff, DRB members, and members of the public. Yeah, this is what we've prepared to per the code requirements to provide landscape screening and borders where needed, and also looking at enhancing the connection of the Paseo de las Iglesias River Park path to the west branch of the Santa Cruz, which Chris highlighted on that previous slide. I think we have some more versions of that as well. So It's kind of a general, on this page, the landscape border is required along Cottonwood Lane, and then with the zoning requirements, there were no other requirements with the R1 adjacent to our residential. So, but we are working with the design review, the Planning and Development Services Department to go through some of those requirements right now. The main transmission lines come in from the east side of the project, and which is why we are somewhat less densely planted on that side. It looks a little sparse, but there are major transmission lines going through there, so we wanted to make sure those were not impacted. And I guess next slide. There you go. And then that extends down to past the property, beyond it to where there's a connection where we can make a accessible path connection to the river park with the multi-use path. The site is quite a bit higher than the river park path. The path on the river park drops, so we were able to extend the multi-use path along Cottonwood Lane to this point to make a better connection. So we have prepared a native plant preservation plan, and the trees with the dashed circles are what we're preserving in place, and then we're mitigating what's been removed. But in general, the entire site, like was said previously, was sort of a gravel, aggregate mining operation and was mostly disturbed. Lots of invasive plants on site, and what we're doing with our landscape is, mitigating the native plants that have been removed and enhancing that with the new native vegetation. Next slide. We are using all native plants for this project, including in our seed mix as well, but this is just a highlight of the trees: desert willow, palo verde, mesquite. Shrubs include hackberry, brittle bush, and creosote, and lycium, desert spoon, and prickly pear. So very in tune with the Sonoran Desert and with the adjacent river park restoration project. Next slide. Here's a couple of just the simulations of before and after. The top is a current condition, and the bottom shows the new multi-use path adjacent to Cottonwood Lane, the access road. You can see also in the little key map where this photo was taken, and then the substation behind. The wall is what was proposed, is 12-foot high, split face with a color band near the top, and just put a little bicyclist in there just for scale. Facility, that's what we're having, and this is going to be softened with the landscape buffer. This is the next simulation slide. So this is taken from the north side looking south and showing that same sort of view along Cottonwood Lane and what is there currently and what is proposed. Next slide. So this is down, you can see the location of the photo is kind of where the red dot arrows are looking towards the current site, and then how the new substation will be at the bottom. So it is pretty far back removed from the site. The wall helps to screen the lower portions of the substation, as well as provide security, and the new static masts, which bring in the power, are shown there, that actually work pretty well with the mountain as far as not being eyesores in the sky, but from this perspective anyways. So this is that view. Next slide. Oh, we'll go back. So yeah, no, other things to note is, this, I think I mentioned before, there's, I worked on the previous segment of the Santa Cruz River Park, and making that connection to the West Branch was important to us. So really understanding how that connection works, I think that's going to be a really bonus with this project to make that connection. And yeah, I think it overall enhancement of the property. So that's all I had on my list here, but happy to answer questions at this time that relates to landscape, and then other things might go to TEP or civil.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Right off the bat, a question I have is, could the applicant explain the overhead? What type of activities are happening overhead? Because I see there's transmission lines in the area, and they need to make a connection to your substation. And we have this rendering here. But is there a plan view or an elevation view of what's called a static mast? And maybe you can explain what a static mast is.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I would like to pass that off to our civil and transmission engineer, Miranda Jackson. She can answer that better than I would be able to.
Good morning. Yes. So we have two different types of poles that would be installed. The static masts that are kind of highlighted in this picture here, those kind of serve as lightning protection. To protect the rest of the site, we have them spread out throughout the site to make sure that there are no weak spots of it. As for the overhead lines, we have that existing 138 line. You could kind of see the lattice tower off to the left of the screen. So we're going to have two poles that will intercept that to have the lines drop in into our dead end structures in the substation.
Miranda, in this, this is like a rendering inside a photo. So I was assuming that the lattice transmission line is an existing condition, but is that part of the new work or not?
So the lattice is existing, and then we will add two more additional poles that will be along the same alignment as the existing lattice towers. And those will be similar heights and then kind of just drop in towards the substation.
Thank you for that clarification.
Hey, Nate, this is Chris. On a follow-up on that, are those two poles you just described shown on this plan? I can't identify where those two poles and where the wires that come from the lattice tower to the site are actually routed.
Those poles are not described on this.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, so the follow-up on my end to that is there was a comment about landscaping between the substation and the existing river path, multi-use path, not being very dense or being able to be incorporated onto this plan because of overhead wire routing, and that overhead wire routing is not shown on this plan.
Correct.
Maybe we can go back to the slide that shows the site plan. There you go. Well, it's the landscape plan.
I'd like to clarify, Nate, that existing overhead on the lattice towers is technically off property. There's no wire that actually crosses this property as part of that existing transmission. Correct?
I don't know. It doesn't, the view that we have is not showing us those lattice towers in relation to the site.
From looking at this image that's on screen currently, and I scrolled through to that development plan, it appears that wire routing and the overhead wire routing and those towers are off site. So where the wires come in and out of the site, I think is an important feature, in my opinion, especially related to landscaping.
This is Rosemary. Question, what is the height of the static masts to be located on site?
So the static mast will be 55 feet above ground.
And for context, how high are those lattice towers?
The lattice towers are about 90 to 100 feet.
Thank you.
So there'll be 2 poles at that same height to the east of that property line we're seeing at the top of the screen, and then so those 2 poles will really be the tallest thing on the site, or the mast will be taller.
I'm curious why those masts are not noted on this exhibit here. Are they? Maybe they are. I'm not reading it properly.
I don't think we show them. I think with the information we got from TP was made in the substation, so we know that they're coming through the site on that west side of the wall or the east side of the wall there, but the TP may have a better idea of where that's coming in. So it looks like there's a message, but
Okay.
I have a couple of other questions. The first one is, I understand, well, I guess I've got 3 questions actually, sorry. I understand the need for power, substations. Not that I'm an expert on electricity, but I guess it would be useful if you guys could talk about why you chose this site if it is in a flood zone, first off. Second, when I look at this plan of the substation, it seems like there's an awful lot of space in between the equipment and the wall, particularly on that south side. So it'd be nice to check, is that the kind of minimum size this wall has to be? And the third question is environmental. Well, I guess I live close to one of these substations, and so like the color of the wall seems like it fits, but in my experience, you guys put these really loud signs on these walls every few feet saying keep out or dangerous, or I can't remember the exact text. Is there going to be any signage on these walls? Because that to me often is, if we're just talking about a visual thing, that is a bigger eyesore than the wall ends up being. So if you could answer that, that would be useful.
I believe we are required to give notice of the danger of this property. That is, it's an inherent danger to the public if they enter into it. Our gates will have signage. Whether or not that is on the walls itself, I am not sure. I know it will be on the gate.
Well, on this one, it's on the gate, it's on the wall. Every 3 feet, there's a massive sign. There's hundreds of them all over the wall. So it seems that's an important part of, if you're planning to do that, that should be on the rendering so we see what the reality is that we'd actually be seeing, right?
Okay. Yeah, we are in compliance with federal regulation when it comes to our facilities and warning people of the dangers inside.
And what about the other 2 questions then, in terms of the size and the location?
Yeah, so regarding the size of the substation and the interior space, it is designed by our engineering team to ensure that there's enough space for safe maneuvering within the substation. Obviously we're dealing with extremely high voltage electricity, and so there has to be safe clearances, and so that is incorporated into this design.
I guess it would be useful to have that on the plan so we can see, because obviously the clearance is different on each side. So when we look at it, just to see what those are so we can understand that it's a minimum, I guess.
Yeah, specific design of the interior space is not given on these preliminary development plans, but it's specific to federal regulation.
I'm curious along those lines if the enclosure was planned in such a way that a future expansion would be possible.
There
And you
is
left
space.
space for the future.
There is space for a mobile skid inside the walls. A mobile substation skid is similar to what exists currently to the south of the property and north of Aho Way.
And my next question is, could you comment on if any of this equipment makes noise? And what kind of noise levels do you expect in a substation, if any?
Yeah, in accordance with UDC, substations must remain below 65 decibels at night. And so that is within the range that we will be within a residence zone.
This is a question for staff. I know this has a lot to do with zoning. And does the DRB get to weigh in on if this is appropriate for the zone or not?
Generally, under the UDC, there's a stipulation of what the DRB is going to evaluate that relates specifically to the aesthetics, the landscaping, those sorts of things. Now, I believe if there's a opinion that the DRB has that they want to share with the zoning examiner, that's sort of outside of your purview, but you certainly could weigh in on that to the zoning examiner as well for consideration. Maria, would you agree with that? You've got more experience working with this board.
Yes, and I have with us our zoning administrator, Lisa Hamblin. So Lisa, please feel free to kick in. But I'm reading the first line here on the DRB purview that says any building housing such facility, meaning the distribution system, the utilities use group, shall be in keeping with the character of zone in which it is located.
I see. So if it's in a residential zone, the facility shall be in character with residential. If it's in a commercial zone, then it'll be in keeping character with commercial, that type of thing.
That's
And
correct.
so we're really evaluating whether this enclosure is in keeping with the character of the zone, which it has the zone 1, R1 and R2. Could we get a tiny little brief on R1 and R2 and what the differences between those two zones might be? And I know there's some hands up from the board. I'll get to you, Rosemary.
Generally, the differences between R1 and R2 relate to the density and some of the types of uses that are permitted in the R2 zone, which is less restrictive. I'm trying to pull up some specifics right now. I don't know, again, if Eliza, if you have some things that...
Just in general, the R1 is limited to single family residence and perhaps duplex, depending on the property size. The R2 is more for multifamily type of residential development. It allows, bigger heights, higher density, up to 15 units per acre. And it allows in general also other civic uses. For instance, you have your churches, your schools, which are allowed in the R1 and R2.
Okay, thank you, Maria and staff. So we're really trying to we're really focusing on the style of the masonry wall, the landscape, the perimeter security drive, the outdoor lighting. We haven't seen the outdoor lighting on the screen yet. There's no windows, and no other kind of design features have been discussed. Rosemary, your hand has been up, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I just had a couple questions about the exhibit. So maybe we could switch back to the site plan package with landscaping. I noticed that when Chris described the project, he mentioned a gray block wall and then the exhibit showed brown. So I wanted to clarify the colors for the masonry wall.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think our standard that is seen in other substations, the Patriot substation at Kolb and Escalante, as well as Kino substation at 36th and Kino, have a gray band. You're right, there is a discrepancy in that wall treatment. And so we can correct that.
So is the wall that we're seeing, is that what will be built there? We're looking at the tan with the brown band?
That's what we proposed. Or go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
No, I think the colors are up for discussion, but in general, this is the sort of the palette that we came up with based on the past wall designs for TEP.
Okay, but you're willing to put in a tan split face CMU wall with the dark brown band as depicted here. Okay.
Yes.
To me, that looks more palatable than a gray block wall would in a residential neighborhood. But maybe other members of the DRB might have something to say about that. And then my other question is about the pad elevation. So what is the pad elevation of the enclosure with respect to the surrounding neighborhood?
I'm not specific. I don't have that specific information in front of me right now, what the pad elevation is. I know that it is in conformance with, well, it's the same height as the surrounding ground. I'm sorry.
Okay, so it's not higher, it's not lower, it's similar height to the surrounding neighborhood?
That's correct. It's that same grade.
Do you ever make your substations kind of lower so that the effect is it's screened even more?
I don't think we do. I think there's substantial engineering that goes into the grounding work. There's a grounding grid that goes into the ground to prevent electric currents. And so, yeah, we remain above the 500-year floodplain.
Yeah, you
flood
go.
level.
Yeah, drainage is probably a consideration. There is a long span. How long is that wall that we see in that rendering?
Oop, wrong direction. Kevin, are you familiar with the length of the wall?
Yes, I'm just pulling up that now so I can take a couple measurements. If you want to hold on 1 second, I can get that.
Thank you. Where I'm thinking I'm going with that is a long wall. It is, it has some attraction as a colored split face block, but it becomes monolithic after a certain point, and maybe it could be enhanced by breaking it up with some other patterns. Or something maybe artistic or something. Grace, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just going with that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maria, but I think the zoning for R1 and R2, the maximum wall height they can have there is 6 feet, and so I'm wondering, along with what Nate was saying, if we can sort of bring this scale down, not necessarily shorten the wall, but introduce some design elements that'll make it more sort of human scaled.
Yeah, so in response to that, the limit to the wall height in residential zone is 10 feet, and we're requesting a special exception use to bring it to 12 feet, which is in conformance with federal critical infrastructure and protection standards. So that is also a standard we see in other newer substations that are coming up in Tucson.
Yes, if I can just bring up that wall, that longest length there is about 535 feet.
Okay, I strongly recommend that we add a little bit more interest to that wall. I'm sure there's going to be some control joints and maybe some. Yeah, I think we need to. I'll let some of the architects speak to that, but I could break up the plane there a little bit.
Well, I would say it's just out of scale for a residential neighborhood. And you could break it up a little bit, but just this, you know, even if you kind of play games with the facade and shifting and pulling, it's just massive. You know, it's just not appropriate.
The trees that are going to be lining that length of the wall, what's the expected height of those trees, Scott?
Approximately 25 to 30 feet for a mesquite, which is the main tree planted along throughout the site. They were the most in the native plant inventory to be mitigated. So we have, I think, 90 some trees, 90 mesquites, and those are majority of those are along Cottonwood Lane.
Yeah. And those would be at full height, 25 feet, you say. What would the expected height be right off the bat?
Depending on the size, we're typically seeing maybe a larger size, maybe 24-inch box tree would be in the 8-foot range if we're lucky. But
yeah,
supplies are low right now. So.
Gotcha.
I mean, within, I would say 5 years, it would be above the wall height and screening that site. So.
Will you be using 24-inch box trees or 15-gallon?
We're currently proposing. Yeah, I have that. Let's see. Yeah, we're currently proposing all 24-inch box trees and 5-gallon shrubs, so more mature sizes that we can get.
One thing to point out, that east wall, it faces the wash, and the wash in that multi-use path that is to the east is about 15 to 20 feet lower than the site.
Is there a section that shows the heights going across?
Across the site, not in this set of plans. In the development plans that were submitted to the city, there is section views.
I mean, is the substation pretty flat and then it drops off after that? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, the substation site is relatively flat. It's within a couple of feet of the existing Cottonwood Lane Road, but once it gets to the east boundary line, there's a steep slope there. And there's an initial 12 to 15 foot drop, and then it slopes towards the wash after that.
I have 2 questions. One is, I understood that the federal CIP requirements was a 10-foot wall and that TEP had a standard of 12-foot. So please correct me if I'm wrong in that regard. And then, is there going to be any lighting outside of the wall?
To your second question, there will be no lighting outside of the wall. What lighting is provided is interior only, and it is only on during emergencies or maintenance activities, which regular maintenance maybe once a month, but there will be no dusk to dawn lighting on the property at all.
In regards to the first question?
12 feet is the critical infrastructure protection standard that TEP uses for all of our substations.
To me, Page and DRB board, I don't think a smaller wall would be more beneficial for any particular reason, because we want to screen all that equipment. And then obviously there's a safety aspect to it. So I think that 12-foot wall, in my point of view, we just need to make it the best looking wall possible.
Well, I think the size is important because you're blocking views from all over the site. That's what, so apart from just the views for neighbors and people walking, you know, the mountains and the nature around Tucson is one of our prime attraction, you know, not to say that it doesn't have a value in itself. And that's why, apart from the scale, just the, you know, I would say the Santa Cruz is one of our prime amenities that is trying to be improved in the city. And so I'm just concerned too about that east side of the project. The fact there's no kind of, if you're kind of offsetting that river and the arroyo habitat that hopefully will be more kind of worked on in future years with the city, you know, there isn't much relationship to the geometry of the, you know, the offset of the river isn't being explored. And so to me, the section and where, if it's draining a little bit, is there openings in that wall to allow the water to drain back into the river? Have you looked at the drainage all around the site for the watershed?
Yes, drainage has been looked at in depth. And there are, I believe they're called weep holes at the bottom for drainage to leave the site. I wanted to mention that the mobile home park to the west of the site, there is a the position of the mobile homes is such that there are no views to the west from those mobile homes. The back of the homes faces a 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on the top. The side yards is the most accessible part of those mobile homes, and they are on a more north-south alignment as opposed to east-west. So there are no particular views from inside the mobile home park to the west. I'm sorry, to the east. Excuse me.
I had a couple more questions. One, what's the height of the equipment being screened other than those static masts? What's the height of most of that equipment?
Miranda, would you be able to help with that?
Yep. So varying per piece of equipment, our transformers are roughly about 14 feet above ground. Our control shelter, the unmanned site, is about 10 to 12 feet. So everything else is minimal to the static mass and the drop-in poles.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question. So it looks like we're connecting to another multi-use path. The elevation change seems to be pretty extreme. I'm curious what that connection looks like, and are there drainage culverts going under that connection?
The multi-use path that's being proposed runs along Cottonwood Lane. It actually connects into the existing multi-use path that's further to the south. And at that location, the elevation of Cottonwood Lane and the multi-use path that's out in the wash are relatively same elevation.
Okay, but isn't there a drainage way running through there? You know, where the path crosses, isn't there drainage happening underneath that area?
Adjacent to the driveway of the site or further to the south?
Crosswise, perpendicular to the connection that you're showing.
So it's it runs the portion that's running in east-west connecting to the existing path. That's relatively flat through there.
And it's not elevated?
No.
And then I just wanted to share a thought. So we talked about breaking up, you know, the monotony of that masonry wall, one way to do that would be to introduce some masonry piers at intervals, maybe 24 to 32 feet, to articulate that wall a bit rather than just having one continuous mass. What do you think, DRB?
I think breaking that wall up is a good idea. Maybe even in making it more attractive, because your multi-use path is going to go right by one side of that wall or two sides of that wall. Make it look good.
Well, what does everyone think about the signage comment I made earlier? Because that's going to break up the wall.
That is going to break up the wall.
But I think we should see what that is going to look like. Because signage is part of our purview, I believe.
I also
Yeah,
want. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to say I agree with that. I also think that we need to see those sort of really significant the height of those poles and what that looks like from the multi-use path in terms of it integrating with the existing system.
I was going to speak to the wall again and Rosemary's suggestion. There's also really nice wall on 22nd Street east of Plumer, against there's like an open space there and trail that has instead of a solid banding, the banding goes up and down, and it really changes the scale of the wall as well. It does have columns. And I think that's a nice way to break up the big mass of that wall.
How about planting some sort of vines or crawlers on the wall?
They have a road around the wall. 20-foot access road all the way around.
Well, and I think TEP cuts their plants that get close to the wall.
Chair Kepler and members of the board, I would like to I'd like to say that the signage on the wall, I'm sorry, is based on NERC standards. So there's federal regulations that we have to show. As part of the special exception land use application narrative, we have an example of that signage on a gate. And so that is what it looks like. And that is a typical example of our mechanical card reading gate.
I guess it's just the amount of signage I've seen on the other, like that one you see on the wall to the right, that I know there's so often, there's so many of them that it's a real eyesore on some I've seen. So it'd be nice to see the number that you're intending, or if there's a rule about, do they have to be like 5 foot on center, just to understand that, because that's becomes this visual, it takes away from just having the kind of earthen material that you're trying to kind of blend the wall with, I would say.
I don't think the intent is to blend with the wall. And I used to work for an electric utility, and safety is a huge concern. Electricity kills. And so anything to protect people from hurting themselves, I think, is really of the utmost importance here.
Well, yeah, I'm not wanting, I understand.
Just in case they're climbing the 12-foot CMU wall,
Let's hear what Susanna was going to say, and then I want to listen to what you were going to say too, Chris. Go ahead, Susanna.
I guess I understand the need for safety, and I'm not saying signs need to blend in if they're trying to be safe, but just the quantity of them, I would like to know what the code suggests, how many there should be, because the one that I have seen, it's like you take one step and you're seeing an identical sign almost. It just seems kind of overboard, especially with the height and the kind of other things that are done with the wall. So I'd just like to understand how many there would be and what it's based on.
Again, I don't have the specific standard, and I can find that out for you. However, it is to national energy regulatory standards, so that is not something we have control over.
And do you guys exceed the standard or just meet the standard?
I believe we meet them. Yes, we would not exceed them.
Generally, what the city finds when they're doing sign review in situations like this is that the signage that meets that federal standard is acceptable. I'm still would need to check the code closely, but that's generally what's found.
Is there, Chris, you had a comment. I wanted to turn it over to you, Chris.
No, I was making a joke, but I do have a statement I'd like to make. I'd like this applicant to come back. I think there's material information not shown on this application that we keep talking about that we need to see visually if we're going to make an assessment of this facility based on aesthetics, landscaping, screening to the surrounding community, and other things under our purview. There's information in this application packet that is deficient for us to make that decision, specifically around the signage. If there's that much signage per code, per requirements, per any federal regulation, why is that not shown in the visual representations of this application? The poles from the main transmission line to this site are not represented. There was direct statement that landscaping was not included in certain areas because of that equipment. I need to see that stuff before I can make a determination on whether or not this facility meets the items under our purview. Even an aesthetic of this gate is not included in the application. This is a major visual impact directly to that neighborhood. It's at the closest point of the wall to the actual neighborhood, and that multi-use path not included in the application. Or at least from what I've seen in the application, this was brought up separately at this review. I also have concern about the secondary driveway that heads south and safety conflicts on how that path interacts with or how that driveway interacts with the multi-use path and with the street in general. It doesn't hit at a common angle, and I think could be a safety conflict. But I'd like to see this applicant come back, and I guess with this board, maybe we can come up with a list of a bullet list of things, the wall and some other items. But I think you guys need to come back and add some more information to this application.
All right. I think that is where we're headed. But let's ask for what we want. But the danger is we won't ask for something that we just need to see everything. For example, the gate. I noticed there was a security camera posted above the gate. There's lightning protection masts. I guess the best way to show that would be exterior elevations that show the signs, the wall, and all the features that are going to be not screened. Those are the things of interest.
I'd like to see a section too and to understand the existing topography and what you're changing, plus to understand the access requirements within the enclosure, which are controlling the size of this thing in the first place, right? And also, if I go on Google Earth, it looks like a lot of those folk have this great view right now. I think the onus is on you to show that you're not destroying anyone's view or anything like that. You know, in the drawings.
One thought I have in terms of view, if this wasn't going to be a substation, it's zoned R1 and R2. And one of those zonings allows multifamily, so presumably they could build up to, I don't know, maybe they could build 2 stories. Does this zoning allow for 2-story construction?
Yes, it does.
So that would block a view. If a multifamily project went in there, that view would be gone.
But I would argue you wouldn't allow a project that big with that height. It's not appropriate for the scale of the neighborhoods around it. So
well,
it would be
if it's appropriate or not is one thing, but is it allowed in the zoning is sort of germane here.
So if somebody comes in with a proposal to build 2 stories on this site, that would not need to go through a plan amendment. It would simply need to meet current code requirements. And so you wouldn't have the mechanism to get them to downscale that development or reduce its height or reduce its density. They could simply go in there and meet code and build.
Well, and that's not true everywhere. Some neighborhoods, it's very difficult to go 1 inch above. Well, all neighborhoods.
Yeah.
There's a height restriction.
But isn't there a lot coverage restriction?
Certainly there's going to be that as well. So, you know, it's just sort of getting into hypotheticals. There are so many different variables that would need to be considered. So it's hard to say exactly what would happen without really looking at a specific proposal. But there are restrictions on lot coverage. There are restrictions on heights for every zone, but generally R2 would permit up to 2 feet. I mean, there may be conditions on a previous rezoning that may limit it. There are certain things that could happen. But as long as they could meet those requirements, they could go in there. It's only when you get into like rezonings where you have to look at, or special exceptions, where you can actually, look at adjusting the requirements and the standards.
Along this line of thoughts, if it was a multifamily, would there be a requirement to make the electric connections underground, or could they have aerial service?
I don't know the answer to that, but as long as there is no requirement for underground utilities in general, then they could probably have aerial service.
Interesting. Well, it's just a point of comparison, because if it's not this project, it's another project. And we're trying to make sure that it conforms to the zoning architectural feel.
One other point that I think just bears making is that this site is an existing brownfield site. It had been a mining site previously. There's a lot of dust that comes up from this site. There is the existing erosion that's occurring that this would mitigate, and it would address so many of those issues that are currently at play here. So in many respects, I believe that it's going to be an improvement over the existing conditions. Assuming that the aesthetics and design considerations are addressed.
All due respect on that, a 20-unit apartment complex would also serve the purposes you just outlined.
Absolutely. And that's certainly the case, and I don't disagree with that.
Okay, well, I don't think we're going to get to.
Can we move this to a motion? I think we're going in circles.
Yes, please, Chris.
Do I have to read the whole thing? But I'd like to see this group come back with additional information added to this application, specifically around the elevation aesthetics of the wall. If this was a new building structure within our purview, there would be an articulation or some sort of facade breakup required every 50 feet. I'd like to see some attempt at that type of scaling to bring in some human scale to this thing. We need to see all signage represented, all items that would be visible above the 12-foot wall height. I need to see all improvements on-site or off-site related to this project, specifically poles, transmission wires related to this project that are going to be installed in this project.
As well, will there be distribution lines coming out of here?
Very
that
much so.
We need to have them show.
And that directly relates to landscaping on the east side of this, between the facility and the river wash area. There was a statement made that that landscaping was very limited due to power line improvements. I'd like to understand more of that.
Yeah, I don't think we need a motion to have them come back. We can just say come back, right?
Yeah, that's
Or
where
do-
I'm headed with that. I'm trying to keep this as succinct into a bullet form so whoever's taking notes can write these down and make sure that they get
Mr.
the
Chairman, members,
applicant understands these points.
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, we do need a motion from the DRB. If the desire of the DRB is to continue, then that motion is to establish that and establish what items the DRB will need to see from the applicant.
Okay.
And if I may, Mr. Kapler, members of the DRB, we have here Ms. Zigir, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing your last name. She's one of the neighbors. She actually went in person to our office, and she was informed that, you know, the DRB is actually virtual. So she's here, and it's up to you if you would allow her to speak at this point. I know we already had a call of the audience.
We did have a call of the audience. Well, I think we can let her speak for a minute, because while she's speaking, she might bring up something that we could add to our request for more information. Go ahead, audience member.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and Ms. Aguirre, if you can state your name and your address for the record, I'll thank you very much.
Okay, good morning. My name is Abriza Zagir. I live at 2425 South Forest Avenue. And thank you for letting me address you after call to the audience. So this proposed TEP Cotton Substation is, as you well know, is within 50 feet of the established 1970s Desert Pueblo Mobile Home Park. I went to the public meeting on June 22nd this year, neighborhood meeting, and they stated at that meeting that the daytime, they didn't state the daytime decibels. They only stated the decibels between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So, and again, as listening to this, I would be curious to know what the decibel reading during the day is going to be coming off that that power substation. Also at that meeting, they stated that lights, there would be lights, would be constantly on at the PDC building and yard equipment areas. So, and during their presentation, they said that there would be no dawn to dusk lights. So this kind of creates light pollution in a naturally dark area. A 10 to 12-foot wall, whichever it is, was not going to diminish the light pollution or the constant humming sound. And this drone of electric power and the light pollution will affect the quality of life of both human and non-human residents in the area. And there is a need for the bank protection and rerouting of runoff to qualify, I guess, for this special exception zoning. And does TEP propose that it's taken to the site to a 100-year event or a 500 catastrophic event? And are these qualifications within the FEMA federal and state guidelines? Okay. And if not, is there an accountability in the form of liability insurance written into an approval of documents of a catastrophic event that does not hold the Pima County or the city of Tucson or its citizens responsible for this privately owned substation built so close to the Santa Cruz River? There were 8 other proposed sites, not including the current temporary site at Ajo and Cottonwood, where the bank protection already exists. 2 of the 9 sites, site 3 is actually kitty corner if you go from north to west, where those poles are going to be located. And site 8 is actually in a commercial site on the other side of the river, excuse me, south of Silver Lake. So TEP bought this land knowing it contains, I'm going to call it a mixed bag of unstable fill next to the Santa Cruz River, knowing a special exception approval would be needed. So one of the reasons TEP chose to choose this site, as stated in the neighborhood meeting notes, was it is the most cost-effective siting option. So they bought the land, apparently assuming that this would just go ahead and go through. Anyway, the least, and it's one of the least appropriate sites of the 9 sites that they looked at. And the current temporary site, which is more in line with the Santa Cruz, River Plan, could be expanded, and trading the area where folks actually enter the Santa Cruz River Park is changing sites. The site that they're proposing would be better added to the Santa Cruz River Park area, and would do less damage to the river park and or try to change the flow of the river. Anyway, thank you for your attention, and let me squeeze in not call the audience.
You're welcome. Thanks for the comments. We appreciate it. Chris, I hope you were working on a motion. Susanna, your hand is up. I don't know if it's current.
Oh, sorry, that's old.
Okay, that's fine.
I just have one more thing before we go to the motion. I think it would be important to see a view looking toward the west, looking back at the property from across the river. I think, we've talked about what that might look like, but since we're getting more specific about what it is we want to see, I think that would be important to see, because that view will be predominant.
I'm curious if there's another substation that is similar that you could make some exhibits from, and we could see pictures of that.
Yes, we do have other example substations that we could provide exhibits of, specifically Harrison and Keno. That's at the intersection of Harrison and Keno, and 36th Street and Keno.
Are those in R1 locations?
I do not know the zoning of those locations off the top of my head at this time.
Well, that would be important to know. if it's representative of what we're going to get on this project.
Yes, I just received a note from my colleague that yes, those are in the R1 zones.
Chris, you
one other, sorry, I just have one other question. Given that our purview here at DRB is of limited capacity, I'm curious whether this has already gone to the zoning examiner, or if not, when that will happen.
This is a requirement of the special exception land use process. It will go to the zoning examiner on October 20th.
Thank you.
I also just received note from another colleague that the signs will be every 50 feet per federal standard.
Every 50, 50?
50, correct, 50 feet.
All right, we need a motion. Are you working on it, Chris?
I was kind of doing it in my head, trying to avoid writing things down. But I think I'm ready to go. Let's see if I can. I'm not sure how to. I'll take a stab at it here. Maria, you ready with your notes? Okay. Design Review Board has reviewed the applicant's project for compliance with the special exemption use specific standards for utilities distribution system and finds the project requires continuance to provide additional information with the use specific standards set forth in UDC section 4.9.11.a.8 with the following conditions. Provide additional rendered information regarding the screening wall with additional articulation and or scaling of elements on that wall to bring it more into conformance with a residential scale or human scale. Please show all signage, gates, elements within the design, within the improvements that will be visible from above the wall height in that rendering. Please provide all information regarding all improvements surrounding or included in this project on property, off property, including poles, transmission lines, driveways, grading. Please provide a cross section in the east-west direction and in the north-south direction, articulating heights of walls, surrounding grades, and relationship to surrounding neighborhood and the Santa Cruz River Wash. I think that's all I had. Did I have another one?
Does anyone want to add another request for information before we set the motion?
Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, just wanted to, maybe I missed it, but Ms. Dickinson had requested earlier a wall section to be provided to the DRB.
Yeah, Chris, I think went over some wall sections.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to see a section in the through the site in a north-south direction and in an east-west direction.
Okay, thank you.
The only other thing I added was just the access plan, just to show that this is the smallest size that you need. Or whether if you are planning for expansion that is shown on that, just so we can understand that clearly.
I'll accept that amendment, Maria. Please show in the materials, all safety offsets from proposed equipment and potential expansion areas.
Great. We have a second on the motion.
I'll do it.
Thank you, Susanna. Motion is seconded for the continuance with a list of requested additional information. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes, and we're on to our next agenda item, which is item number 6. The DRB purview and rezoning special exception and variance requests, which we actually just went through one. Is that right, Maria?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
It's
And
always good.
yes, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, back since April, the DRB has been discussing several projects where there were several questions about, the purview of the DRB, if the DRB was able to request certain items from applicants. And we already organized for you and made a presentation on the landscaping and water harvesting requirements. So that was done a couple of months ago. But what I included here in the agenda are, I believe, 3 examples of projects where the DRB had questions. And at that point, staff had to attempted to answer them, and I think we got us into a good place. But still, I went ahead and invited Elisa Hambling, who's here, our zoning administrator, to help us clarify some of the questions that DRB had. So, and correct me if I'm forgetting something, but like the example that I included here was the case that you first reviewed today, the conversion from office to from single family residence to office. And so I'm including here again the purview of the DRB. At that point, when the case was first reviewed for the DRB, the question was about landscaping. How detailed can the DRB be in terms of requesting, specific landscaping materials? And also the other one was about, like we discussed again today, the specifics of design of access points, driveways, turn ready and all that. So is there anything else from this purview that you would like to ask the zoning administrator today that she can help us clarify?
I'll ask something because it's just on the screen in my face that it's talking about a dominant scale, that that is part of zoning, right? There's a scale that is established not just in height but in plan, a mass. So I wonder if the zoning examiner could talk about that a little bit.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Elisa Hamblin. I'm the zoning administrator, PDSD. So my role, just so you all are aware, is to interpret and provide clarification on the UDC as it relates to development proposals and other items that are governed by that code. So to answer your question, I mean, the scale is an item that is regulated by zoning, right? We have setbacks, we have height limits, and we have other standards that are part of our standard zoning. So when we have a case such like this, where we're trying to determine the compatibility with the surrounding neighborhoods, we are asking the DRB to review beyond just our standards that maybe a zoning reviewer might look at, like whether the setbacks are met or whether it's exactly 25 feet or whatever the height limit may be, but rather, in addition to that, how it complements and fits in with the neighborhood, because that's a little bit more of a subjective and feature that we're asking you to take a review at, which is not necessarily something like a staff person can make a determination on whether construction complements adjacent properties. That's why we have pulled together a board of experts that can provide some direction on whether it is complementary or not.
Oh, thank you. That's useful to know that you're looking for us for that guidance or opinion on that issue of scale. Thank you.
She said there was a group of experts, though. I wonder what group is that?
If there are no more questions related to this purview from this section of the of the UDC, let's take a look at the second example. So this is one of Tucson Water's well improvements. You've seen many of them, and so the issues that the DRB raised were mostly related to landscaping and screening. And but also at the last one, if I remember correctly, the DRB also was trying to explore maybe, suggesting to the applicant the use of solar power to be installed on this water well site. So is there any specific question we can ask the zoning administrator right now that would help the DRB clarify their purview?
Lisa, I have a question, and I think we run into this a lot. We try to look at sustainability aspects of the projects, and we're not quite sure where our purview ends on that, or if there's another board or commission that's taking a look at that. Is that, to your knowledge, I mean, is that something that is in our purview? Are we encouraged to look at, making recommendations on sustainability, or is there another group looking at that?
To my knowledge, that is not within the board's purview, as it's not specifically outlined within the UDC. We do not currently have another board or a group that's reviewing for sustainability features, but we are in the process right now of going through implementation of the climate action plan. So figuring out how to integrate some of those recommendations coming out of the mayor's office with that into our day-to-day operations and review and development. So I know there's momentum there. I couldn't speak specifically as to timeline as to what's happening next with that, but we could certainly follow up with the board if that's helpful for you. I think within your purview, if landscaping in particular or other site features are doing double duty to be sustainable and also address the other design characteristics that are outlined within this example on the screen, for instance, where your role is really to determine whether the facility is keeping in character with the zone. If you can make a recommendation that it's keeping in its character and it's meeting, drought tolerant vegetation or other things as required by our landscaping, I think that's appropriate as well.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And then another question I have that's kind of related, we talk about the human situation, and most of what we do with DRB pertains to visual aesthetics, but there are other aspects like the noise aspect of the TEP project that we looked at today. And I think that's another area where I'm not quite sure if that's something that we can comment on, or, like they mentioned, if it's less than 65 decibels, it's allowed. 65 decibels is pretty loud. So I don't know if that's something that we should be looking at or keep it just to visual aesthetics.
I think it's a case-by-case basis and regarding how the language is laid out in the code. So Maria, would you mind going back up to the case today from earlier?
The purview?
Yeah,
Okay.
the purview for the TEP one, please. So in this use specific standard, it's calling out specifically keeping in character with the zone. Like that is your broad overarching purview within this case. And then it says the DRB shall review, architectural features, ... all of these other things. I find that sentence regarding what the DRB shall review to be clarification on that the first guidance of the character of the zone. So I don't know that noise is necessarily called out in that language. The goal is again in keeping with the character. If the noise coming from a facility can be mitigated through any of those design features that you already have within your purview, I think that's appropriate. But to just require a facility to have less noise without proposing any changes to the items within your purview, I don't think is really appropriate. Did that help answer that question?
It does. So it sounds like we have tools with, wall height, landscape buffer, that sort of thing that we could use to help mitigate noise.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And I think wall height in particular is probably going to be the most effective one in many circumstances. And it would also be an opportunity to discuss with the utility operators of what they've seen about noise emanation to other properties, and maybe they could even do sound measurements or whatever with different wall heights to give you an example of what that mitigation might be. And again, but if the wall height that you're proposing is then making the facility completely out of character with the neighborhood, then that's, I think, where there has to be some judgment and some judicious use of those tools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. The other example I have is probably the one that the DRB has taken the longest in reviewing. It's the overhead power lines proposed by TEP along Silverbell Road. And that went through a variance request that went through the Board of Adjustment, who made the final decision. So I have here the findings of approval, which are applicable. This is the same purview the DRB has, is the same purview that the Board of Adjustment has. So they're the same. That there were so many items going back and forth. So this is our chance to ask the zoning administrator for some clarifications. Nathan, you're muted.
Please refresh our memory here. That one we saw at least 2 times, and probably spent 1 to 2 hours each time going back and forth on it. And then it went to, we realized that if we were going to have any statement in front of the Board of Adjusters, we had to pass a motion with our opinion, one way or the other. And the trail kind of went cold because I thought this went in front of City Council, but what happened? It didn't go cold. It went cold for me. What eventually happened with that case? If you don't mind recapping it quickly.
I didn't follow up the end. I understand it got approved, Elisa.
Yes, it did. The Board of Adjustment granted the variance in that case.
Okay. And I think there was recent activity with the City Council that is giving these kind of TEP projects some sort of permissions, but I don't know specifically. Does anyone here know about that?
I can speak to it a little bit broadly, and Maria, if you know more, please chime in. But the there was a code amendment that was being considered to require a special exception process in cases such as this, or for utility locations. And I cannot remember the entire scope of that, but it was essentially to allow for a special exception process, which allows for more specific criteria to be reviewed in lieu of a case like this going to the Board of Adjustment for a variance. The special exception criteria that were written are use-specific standards. They would be applied in different zones accordingly, and then reviewed by the zoning examiner as part of that process. If I'm remembering the details correctly, but we could certainly follow up with that if there's more questions there.
Yeah, it's in the works. I believe Councilmember Kasachik was pushing for code amendments in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, because I did talk to Steve specifically about this, and the thing is, there's not many tools here to rule on such an exceptional use that they are. Because I mean, it's easy to say, just go underground. Just go underground. And I think TEP wants to avoid that for their own purposes. But I think our recommendation was to not approve a variance, if I remember right. That was our takeaway, wasn't it, Maria?
I don't.
No, the recommendation was to approve it with conditions, and
with conditions.
And if I remember correctly, some of those conditions that were recommended by the DRB was to try to mitigate the visual impact of the power poles along Silverbell through landscaping and public art. But and I was not at the Board of Adjustment meeting, but my understanding was that the Board of Adjustment did not take into consideration that recommendation by the DRB.
So if I remember correctly, Carol went to that meeting and she said that she wished, we changed our vote, and said no, since they didn't read the kind of comments, they just looked at the vote, I think.
Yeah, that's disappointing that our recommendations were not implemented, but we did what we could.
Yeah, but they weren't even read. So it's something to bear in mind that that sometimes our vote one way or another isn't something that becomes encased, right, Elisa? I mean, we're just a advisory group. So to me, it's like in some situations, if there's a doubt, it may be wise to lean to the kind of the nay side then. Could you comment on that, Elisa?
So I'm going to back us up for just 1 minute and just state that I think we're kind of in a unique period of time right now in the diversity and the complexity of cases that are coming before the DRB. So I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation. We, as planners in PDSD, have been challenged to be able to review and implement our code, especially with all of these major utility projects coming through and other things that are just not seen very often. So I really do appreciate the conversation. In the case of the Board of Adjustment, I was not the zoning administrator at that time, and so I wasn't tracking that case real carefully. I did know about the outcome of the votes, but I did not attend the meeting, or I don't remember if I attended the meeting. So I can't speak to the specifics there, but I can speak a little bit broadly about the Board of Adjustment and what their role is. So they're a quasi-judicial board. So that means they're essentially, baby judges that sit together and rule on a case and make a final decision. So their decisions are not even appealable to the mayor and council. They actually go to Superior Court if their their cases are challenged. So they have very specific criteria and findings that they have to review in granting a variance, which are these same findings here on the screen. The findings are set by case law and by Arizona statutes. And so to go outside of that purview, it would open their case up for challenge to go outside of those specific findings. So I think in retrospect, when we're talking about a case that the DRB, this one in particular, the purview is much more vague than the previous cases that we talked about, in that it says your purview is basically to make a recommendation to a variance of the scenic corridor zone and use the same findings as the Board of Adjustment. And that it was not really typical language that you might see as the DRB. And so when I was talking to Maria about this after the fact, the Board of Adjustment is tasked with finding that a proposal doesn't cause any harm or impair or diminish the quality of life. So again, that's going back to like, okay, how does this impact the people around it? And what is the variance? What's the negative impact of the variance itself, the request for the thing that they want to change? So in this case, I would have probably pointed to findings 5 and 6 for the Board of Adjustment, where it says public welfare can't be injurious to other property owners. You can't impair the quality of life or impair property values, diminish the quality of the environment. So for the DRB, I would think about your role as reviewing the case against those findings and offering modifications to mitigate or eliminate those negative impacts. And I think you did that, or maybe thought you were doing that with the proposal related to landscaping and public art, and maybe the Board of Adjustment just didn't view it the same way. The Board of Adjustment does have the purview to grant, deny, or modify a variance, so they can do any of those 3 routes, but it has to be based on the findings. So if in their discussion they felt that the recommendation didn't meet the findings or wasn't appropriate for their purview, then they maybe would have not considered it. Again, I don't remember because I wasn't at that specific meeting, but I think there will be future cases that may come to this board that are specifically related to these findings that the Board of Adjustment would review against. And so those are some of the things that I would just recommend that is considered. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but I hope that I offered some clarity there.
I think it was helpful. I want to clarify something too, to one of the points that you made. My understanding is that if it's a utility in excess of 120 kVA, the Corporation Commission is really the authority, and nothing that we say or even the zoning examiner says can take precedence over that. Do I have that right?
I haven't heard that before. I do know there's a distinction in our code regarding that voltage, so I don't know the background on that, but that is a good question to follow up on as well.
Yeah, because if that's the case, I mean, it's nice that we're looking at these, but no one has to really enact anything that we suggest.
I'll make a note, Rosemary, for that one.
Thank you.
Any other question related to this example? Okay, well, thank you so much, Elisa, for coming in. And if we need her in the future, I'll bring back the big guns and to help us clarify things.
Very good.
Thank you, and I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
All right, we're at staff announcements. Any other staff announcements you want to make, Maria?
Just again to welcome Miss Anthony to the DRB. We really appreciate her and everybody else's willingness to share their time and knowledge with us and the community. It's very valuable, and we'll always be grateful. Another staff announcement, there's a couple of projects coming in your way in the near future that are gonna be new to you, to staff, to everybody. It's gonna be a project in the Sunshine Mile district. It's the Siemens restaurant. They're expanding. So that has to be reviewed by the DRB plus a member of the neighborhood association in which the project is located. The other new case, it's in the Ground Road Investment District overlay. We have not seen a case within the grid. So this will be the first case, and it's the Milagro on Oracle. It's public senior housing. It's a adaptive reuse of the Notel Motel site. So that's coming in. The property has been acquired by the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development Department. So again, that's within the purview of the DRB. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. I can, email you the links to the documents if you need a refresher. I know we made recently a presentation on the Sunshine Mile District, but if you need a refresher on the grid, please do let me know, and I'll be happy to put that together for you. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
I would appreciate any refresher since it's all going to be new to me.
I would
And
too.
what-
I don't think I've done one in the grid since I've been part of DRB.
Okay, yeah, we never had a project. This is the very first one. A presentation to the DRB was done, oh my God, about 3 years ago when it was first adopted. So I'll make sure to put something together.
Thank you. And Maria, would you send links to the current, the best documents for Sunshine Mile? I missed that presentation and I need to refresh my memory on that one.
Yeah, I'll do that, Ms. Brian.
Great. If there's no other announcements or comments, we can close the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your participation and engagement here.
Thank you, Mr. Kapler. And I just have to know that Mr. Stevie had to leave the meeting at 10:03 a.m.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good weekend.